Hello everyone! Today we're going to explore one of the most important parts of the cell, the nucleus. You may have heard that the nucleus is the control center of the cell, but do you know why it's called that? The nucleus has one very important job. It stores the genetic material of the cell. This genetic material, the DNA, contains all the instructions needed for life. Let's take a closer look at how the nucleus works with this genetic material to keep our cells functioning and growing. Now, what is the nucleus? The nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle found in eukaryotic cells or cells with a defined nucleus. Think of the nucleus like the brain of the cell because it directs all the cell's activities. It has different structures: the nuclear envelope, nuclear pores, nucleoplasm, and the nucleolus. Here's a breakdown of the nucleus structure. The first one is the nuclear envelope. The nuclear envelope is the outer layer that surrounds the nucleus. You can think of it like the cell membrane, but specifically protecting the nucleus. It has a double membrane, which means it's made up of two layers of phospholipids, just like the outer cell membrane. The purpose of the nuclear envelope is to protect the genetic material, which is the DNA, inside the nucleus. It acts like a boundary that keeps the DNA safe from the rest of the cell. But it's not a solid wall. The nuclear envelope has nuclear pores, which are like little gates that allow things to move in and out of the nucleus. Now, nuclear pores are really important. Again, these are tiny holes in the nuclear envelope that control what can enter or leave the nucleus. Just like a door controls who can go in and out of a room, nuclear pores control the movement of things like RNA, which helps carry out instructions from DNA, and proteins, which are needed to help the DNA do its job. For example, when the nucleus makes mRNA or messenger RNA, which is a copy of the DNA's instructions, it needs to leave the nucleus and go into the cytoplasm where the ribosomes will read it to make proteins. The nuclear pores let the mRNA pass through to get to its destination. Next, inside the nucleus, there's a gel-like substance called nucleoplasm. It's like the fluid that fills the space inside the nucleus and holds everything in place. It's similar to cytoplasm, but inside the nucleus. The nucleoplasm helps support the nuclear structures and serves as a place where chemical reactions can happen. It's like the working space of the nucleus where things like DNA replication or transcription, which is copying of DNA into mRNA, can take place. So while the nucleoplasm isn't as well known as other parts of the cell, it plays an essential role in making sure the nucleus functions smoothly. And lastly, the nucleolus, which is a small, dark, spherical structure found inside the nucleus. It's not surrounded by its own membrane like the nucleus itself, but it's a distinct region within the nucleus. The main job of the nucleolus is to make ribosomes. Ribosomes are essential because they are the machines in the cell that make proteins. But ribosomes don't actually form completely in the nucleolus. They're assembled in the nucleolus, then transported out of the nucleus and into the cytoplasm where they do their job. Let's go to the genetic material, which is the DNA. So what is a DNA and why is it so important? DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it contains all the genetic instructions for building and maintaining the cell. DNA is a long molecule made up of four types of chemical bases: adenine or A, thymine or T, cytosine or C, and guanine, which is G. These bases pair up. A pairs with T and C pairs with G. Together, they form the famous double helix shape, like what you see in this slide. Each section of DNA that codes for a particular trait or function is called a gene. For example, there are genes that can tell the cell how to make proteins, which are building blocks of the body. The genetic material in DNA is like a giant instruction manual for the cell. It tells the cell everything it needs to do to stay alive and function. Now let's move on to the organization of DNA in the nucleus. So how does DNA fit inside the nucleus? The DNA is very long. If we stretch it out, it would be about 2 meters long in each human cell. To pack it into small nucleus, the DNA is tightly wound around proteins called histones, forming a structure called chromatin. When the cell is not dividing, the DNA exists as chromatin, which is a loose thread-like form. But when the cell is about to divide, the chromatin condenses and organizes into structures called chromosomes. This is when the DNA becomes easier to see under a microscope. The role of histones is crucial. They act like spools around which the DNA is wrapped, keeping it organized and protected. This structure helps the cell store a large amount of information while ensuring the DNA stays safe from damage. Now let's go to the DNA replication, which is copying the genetic material. When a cell divides, or when a cell needs to divide, it must make a copy of its genetic material so that the new cell has all the instructions it needs. This process is called DNA replication. DNA replication happens in the following steps. The first one is unzipping. The double helix of DNA unzips, breaking the bonds between the base pairs. Next one is copying. An enzyme called DNA polymerase adds new nucleotides A, T, C, and G to open strands following base pairing rules. The third one is two identical strands. This creates two identical DNA strands, one for each new cell. This process ensures that each new cell receives an exact copy of the genetic material, maintaining consistency and stability in our bodies. Now, the nucleus is also responsible for getting the genetic information out to the rest of the cell so it can be used. This happens through transcription and translation. When we say transcription, it's the inside the nucleus, a section of DNA is copied into messenger RNA or mRNA. This mRNA is a blueprint that carries the genetic instructions from the DNA in the nucleus to the ribosomes in the cytoplasm. On the other hand, translation. This is when the ribosomes read the mRNA and use it to assemble amino acids into proteins. Proteins perform most of the cell's functions, like building structures, transporting molecules, and speeding up chemical reactions. In short, the nucleus creates the mRNA that tells the rest of the cell how to make proteins, which are essential for everything the cell does. So to summarize, the nucleus is essential for storing and protecting genetic material in the form of DNA. It helps organize DNA into chromosomes, ensures accurate DNA replication, and controls protein synthesis by directing the process of transcription and translation. Without the nucleus, cells wouldn't be able to grow, reproduce, or function properly. It's the hub of all the genetic instructions in the cell. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to see you on the next module. Bye bye.